Atheism logically dismantled using morality, mathematics, and reasoning. Okay, shout out to Daily Dose for Wisdom for the subscriber suggesting this to me. Let's check it out.
If our thoughts are the result of some random evolutionary process, why should we believe anything we think is true?
Well, the first thing is that evolution isn't a random process. But that aside, it's
let me put it this way: it's either directed by an outside intelligence or it's not.
Sure. Okay. I'll give
If
you
it's not directed by an outside intelligence, then it's random.
Right?
Yes.
So, if it's directed by intelligence, then perhaps God exists. If it's not
Sure.
directed by intelligence, why should we believe anything we think?
There's an awesome back and forth exchange. You really see like the conversation unfold and go to deeper levels as it does so. So without me talking anymore, let's go ahead and dive in, and then I'll give some of my thoughts on the back end. Enjoy.
If evil does exist, as much as that may be a problem for why a loving God would allow evil, nonetheless, it's a signpost that something beyond the material world has to exist to allow this realm of good and evil to
exist. In fact, I think Alex recognizes that signpost because on his website, he rails, I think rightfully, against some of the abuses of the Roman Catholic Church, where he talks about how priests have sexually abused children. And obviously, that's a great wrong. But my question is, Alex, if you really think that is a great wrong, why would you deny objective morality? I mean, is that really wrong, or is it just a matter of personal opinion?
Well, I think that we agree in one sense that evil doesn't necessarily disprove God. I'm with you on that. What I would say is to answer your question, objectively, no. It is a subjective thing. Morality, to me, is entirely subjective.
Why do you say that?
Well, because, firstly, a thing to note is that objective morality... Well, let's talk about what objective actually means, I suppose. Objectivity, to me, if you want my definition, would be to say that it is true regardless of human intervention, regardless of human consciousness. For instance, the Earth orbits the Sun. That would be true if all humans disappeared.
Right.
Every single one of them. It would still be an objective fact. But to say that murder is wrong, if every human disappeared, that couldn't still be wrong, surely. That would be a nonsense concept without some kind of human psychology. The only way that you could argue that perhaps it would still be wrong is if there was some kind of transcendent being. But then you need to have that being in order to prove the existence of the objective morality that you're then using to prove the God. So
but what we're doing is we're reasoning from effect to cause, that we have this effect known as this moral law that is pressing on us. As you admitted in the video, and look, videos, 2-minute videos, 10-minute videos, you can't expound on all the nuances. So if this is wrong, correct me. But you seem to say that in fact, I think you quoted, the quote was, let me just quote you accurately on this, because in the video you said this, you said moral truths are so deeply ingrained in us that they feel like they are objective.
Yes.
Right? Okay, so my question is, why would you doubt they're objective if they're so deeply ingrained in us?
Well, because this is where I think Sam Harris is right, in the sense that if you have certain assumptions, so let's say that we could assume that human well-being was a good thing. We'll discuss why shortly, but let's say we assume that. We could then say that it is objectively true that we should act in certain ways, for instance, trying not to murder people. And that would then become an objective morality. Right. So because evolution has instilled within us, through genetics, a drive to stay alive, then we can derive objective moral truths about how we should act in order that complies with this inner nature, which I think has come about through evolution. So even if you don't subscribe to the idea that certain moral actions, such as not killing or not stealing, have come about through evolution, the instinctual nature within us to stay alive causes us to think of those as objective truths. But it's a technicality. So for all intents and purposes, you could say they're objective truths. If you grab 100 people off the street and ask them, is rape wrong? 100 of them will say yes. But that doesn't mean it's objective. I mean, for instance, I put it to you, would you say that chocolate is tasty?
Yeah, I would, but that's a subjective...
Right, sure.
Some people may not like chocolate.
It's subjective.
Yeah.
So
that's a flavor.
So tar can be just as tasty as chocolate. that's no problem,
Right.
right? That's no problem whatsoever. So when you say something along the lines of, so morality is subjective. So what Hitler did being wrong was just an opinion. Well, yes, but in the same sense that chocolate tasting as good as tar is an opinion.
See, I think when
it
we
doesn't make a difference.
Well, no, I think it does, because it's much more obvious that, say, sexually abusing children is wrong than atheism's true.
Right.
So why would you say that atheism's true in order to avoid the obvious conclusion that sexually abusing children is wrong? You already know sexually abusing children is wrong. Now, if you want to use an evolutionary argument, the problem is that undercuts everything you think. Because if everything we think is the product of evolution, the product of the laws of physics or biology or whatever it is, then why should we believe anything we think? Forget about morality for a second. Why should we even believe that atheism's true or that Christianity's true? If we're completely... I'm sorry, I'm suffering from jet lag here. If our thoughts are the result of some random evolutionary process, why should we believe anything we think is true?
Well, the first thing is that evolution isn't a random process. But that aside, it's
let me put it this way: it's either directed by an outside intelligence or it's not.
Sure, okay, I'll give
If
you
it's not directed by an outside intelligence, then it's random.
It's random.
Yes, so?
So, if it's directed by intelligence, then perhaps God exists. If it's not
Sure.
directed by intelligence, why should we believe anything we think?
Because, I mean, this is the old argument from against naturalism that people like
C.S. Lewis.
C.S. Lewis and indeed modern practitioners like Plantinga have put forward, which, as I understand it, is effectively saying if evolution, if effectively it's meant for the propagation of our DNA, it's not aimed at us receiving true beliefs. It's not aimed at us actually. It's not aimed at reasoning.
No.
And ultimately, you could even go as far as to say that the actual processes of matter in motion, atoms banging into each other, electrochemical processes, those are non-rational. Why would we assume that they produce rational thinking? Because ultimately, I mean, and your argument here, I guess, Frank, is it undercuts the whole project.
It's this idea.
Of atheism.
It's almost sort of existential. You know, why should we believe anything if there's no guidance? To me, it's like asking the question, like you said earlier, about, you know, how do we know that we even exist, or that the universe wasn't created last Thursday? For me, it's somewhat based on consensus. It doesn't prove it's true, but reason is one of those things that we need to assume in order to get anywhere. In the same sense, we need to assume that we exist in order to have a philosophical discussion.
No, that's a very wise point. I agree with you. The question is, how do we explain reason on a naturalistic worldview?
Well, reason and consciousness can be explained as coming about through evolution. The way in which we sense the world.
But let's stop there for just a second, though, Alex. If that's the case, why should we trust it?
Oh, well, we don't necessarily have to. Again, it's a subjective thing. But every single person...
But that would mean reason's subjective.
Yes, well, it is.
Well, if reason is subjective, then...
If reason's not subjective, then how do you and I come to different conclusions, both using reason?
Because we have free will. If reason's subjective, we couldn't even communicate. If there weren't these objective, unchanging laws of logic...
well, yes, there are objective rules and tenets of reason, but reason itself is subjective in the same way that morality, you can say, under certain assumptions, there are objective truths about morality. If you have a certain assumption about reason, then yes, there are objective tenets.
Well, that's what I mean. These immaterial laws of logic that aren't made of molecules, how do we explain those on a naturalistic worldview?
How do you mean? How do we explain?
Why are there laws of logic? Why are there laws of mathematics?
They're a product of consciousness. And laws of mathematics are not a thing in themselves, but rather a way to explain the universe. So the laws of mathematics would not exist without human beings, so they are subjective. But the things that they describe would.
Oh, no, hold on.
So when you talk about logic, when you talk about reason, these things aren't ends, they're means. They're means to understanding certain things. So we use reason to understand that the Earth goes around the sun. We use the laws of maths to understand how that happens.
But you just said the laws of mathematics are human conceptions, basically.
Yes, it's a language.
All right. Well, let me ask you this. Let's say there were no human beings on the Earth and there were just two rocks on the Earth. Was it true there were just two rocks on the Earth?
Well, it depends what you mean by two. I mean, sure, like if
in the everyday sense of the word.
This is where things get confusing, because, for instance, I suppose what you're asking is something similar to the question of, does 2 + 2 still equal 4 if there are no humans? And to me, the case is you have to think about what you're describing when you say 2 plus 2. So, for instance, if you're saying if there were 2 rocks and you added 2 more rocks, would there be 4 rocks? Absolutely. But to say that 2 plus 2 equals 4 is like is a good way to bring in the idea that mathematics is a language, because in the same way that I can say,
but it's not an arbitrary language.
Well, it is.
In fact, language itself is based on mathematics, and that's not arbitrary.
I'd say it's absolutely arbitrary.
Math is arbitrary?
No, math isn't, but the language we use to describe it is. It evolves and changes.
Well, yes, but they're referencing objective facts. If we want to call this one book, there is only one book here.
Yes.
Okay, that's an objective fact. If we wanted to call it eins, like in Deutsch, that this is one book, okay, that's a different word, but it's representing the same objective fact. And if we're going to say that reasoning is objective, then there's no way we can come to any conclusions about anything.
There are different ways, even within the laws of mathematics.
Did I say objective or subjective? Yes.
I don't recall that.
If we're going to say reason is subjective, then there's no way we can come to any conclusions about anything. But that's self-defeating, because when I say that, I'm making a truth claim that if reason is subjective, then we can't come to any true conclusions about anything. That actually is an objective truth claim.
Well, I would say that even with something as objective as maths, there are subjective ways in which to understand it, the language we use, even though it seems that it wouldn't be the case. For instance, if you want to find the roots of a quadratic equation, you can do it by using the quadratic formula. You can do it by expanding the brackets, and you get to the same answer. But the reason you're using to get there is subjective. So the answer is a fact of nature. It's true. That would still be the answer, even if humans didn't exist. But the language we use to get there, and the reason that we use to get there, wouldn't.
Yeah, but the reason is objective, but there's different levels here. You have ontology, which is the study of being.
Sure.
Okay. You have epistemology, that's how we know the study of being. Then you might have semantics, which is how you describe the epistemology to get to the ontology.
Sure.
This can be arbitrary, but it's still tethered to objective facts. It's ultimately tethered to an objective ontology.
So what are the tenets of objective reason to you?
Well, start with the basic laws of logic, that they're...
For instance...
The law of the excluded middle, things like that.
Law of non-contradiction, law of excluded middle, law of inference, law of identity. Those are the essentials of the laws of logic. And you start with those, and then you use your sense perceptions to draw conclusions about the real world using those tools, those objective laws of logic.
They're tools, and this is the thing that I see when we're talking about whether reason exists. Reason is a method, and so it
helps us in epistemology, but if they weren't tethered ontologically, if they weren't tethered to reality, there'd be no way we could know anything about reality.
You're making the claim that this realm exists that we call the laws of logic and so on, and that it really is something that we discover in that sense. It's an element of the reality we live in.
We don't determine them; we discover them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Whereas you're making the case, obviously, Alex,
that reason is not something we discover.
Produce. It's something we invent because it helps us.
But you see, that's an objective truth claim right there. That's why it's self-defeating. Alex is saying it's objectively true that reason is subjective.
And the same applies to the moral argument as well, which is you're saying there's this realm of real, right and wrong, good and evil, and you're saying, no, these are just concepts we invent. We don't discover them, but we invent them. And I know many people whose journey to belief in God has been based on the fact that they came to the view that there really is a realm of right and wrong that I discover. I no longer believe that it's all subjective. And obviously others who take your view as well, Alex. I mean, fundamentally, is that where we just come to an impasse where you say, Frank, there is real realms of, these objective laws of logic, and there's real realm of good and evil, and you just say, no, in my opinion, it can all be explained as a subjective. Because ultimately, I believe in objective moral good and evil, because for me, I see that as I see racism is wrong is the same as 1 + 1 = 2. But you say no, that racism doesn't exist when humans don't exist.
I agree with you that I see it as the same. To me, they are both as instinctual. But that 1 + 1 = 2 is, again, it's a mathematical language. But if you're talking in the literal sense that one thing and another thing equals two things, then yes, that is objectively true. But to say that racism is wrong, although it feels just as instinctively true, it doesn't have the same objective grounding in reality.
Say you were living a few hundred years ago in the American South, and maybe racism is kind of just part of the culture. That's the accepted way of things, at least within the white population, let's say, because that's the generally accepted de facto, way of people thinking about it, would that mean racism is okay in that culture? Because that's...
Well, it's a difficult question.
Good question.
Pretty funny ending to the clip there, but I want to kind of just break down really the substance of that conversation. It's actually very simple, even though they went back and forth a number of times. There really are two options. Either morality has been given to us from above by God, in which case it is objective because God is actually able to say, this is how things ought to be, and therefore that is how things ought to be. Now, I will grant to you that implies that you must have a belief in God in order to believe in that. But I'm saying if there is a God, meaning an ultimate source of reality, of truth, of goodness, of beauty, of the universe itself, then he can say 2 + 2 = 4, and it is. And he can say that murder is wrong, and it is. So that's the top-down method of morality, which is the objective moral understanding. Or morality has kind of evolved from the bottom up, and society has decided that murder is wrong. Society has decided A, B, and C. But if it is just from the bottom up, then it will always be subjective. You can't have something that is just a byproduct of time and matter and chance and biology and utility and Darwinian theory and all these things. It can't be a product of evolution in a sense, in a materialistic model, and be objective. So either morality is objective and it is given to us by God from above, or it is subjective and it has arisen from the bottom up. The problem is...
In fact, let's see what the comment's saying. If I were... Okay, well, certainly... the people about nothing. One thing I absolutely love about this channel is how you try to exclude yourself from your content showing whilst still putting your thoughts inside. Yeah, okay, cool. That's basically just replying, giving your take at the end. He said that we don't really need to trust reason or consciousness, but he's here trying to convince people his reasoning and this fair play. Yeah, I hear it. To be honest with you, it's been established, and you come across that issue. If you choose not to believe in God, then you're always going to struggle with that, and you're going to be consistently thinking that, okay, well, society, we've created this, but that means then it's just a pendulum that just swings to whatever. So in the next 10 years, if we decide then racism is good again, then it's good again. In the next 100 years, if we decide, what they're talking about, children wise, there was mentioning something in regards to children, doing incorrect things to the young ones. You get the gist, right? I'm saying that for the YouTube algorithm. If in 10 years time they decide that, okay, it's now okay, you could just do whatever you want to the young ones, does that make it okay? No. And I've always found it fascinating how young babies are born knowing what's not right and what is right. They know, they have this inclination. It's been documented from a very, very, very young age, abnormally young age, to notice what's good and what's not. And the subtle reactions, I don't know if you guys have seen it. There's a YouTube video in fact, not just a YouTube video that went viral in regards to a young child. They were documenting their behavior, and the young child was able to distinguish what was right and what was wrong without being taught it. They was able to associate that, that this person is bad, this character is bad, and then this character is good. And science couldn't distinguish how. I mean, that the child doesn't even know English. They're not even they're not even operating at a language where they understand language, but yet they're able to know good and bad. So you start to see a lot of things become skewed the more you believe that there's no creator, nothing exists. That's when you become super lost. Simple conversations become very complex because you're always trying to reason and well, it has to be because the astrophysicists landed on the materialistic of the axis, y-axis becomes the z-axis. It's like, yeah, I mean, if there's a builder who built this world, this place we call Earth, I'm sure there will be laws that will say, okay, don't damage my property. Try not to finish all the trees. Try not to do this. Try not to do that. This is right. This is wrong. And so forth and so forth. And maybe that builder will leave a manual behind showing you how you should conduct yourself for the best possible experience in that building. The toilets are down there. You could use this to build. You could use that. You could eat this. You could. The manual surely would make sense and align worldwide. And maybe the manual even maybe will be the most popular manual that's ever existed in the entirety of that, you know, of that world, because it's the manual. If you get what I mean, let me know in the comment section down below. But if you enjoyed this video anyways, let me know. Like, subscribe, join the Patreon, because there's plenty of things that I can't post on here. Otherwise, we'll get taken down. So I post those private content there. And yeah, God bless.